A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam & Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad you've joined me on the program today. We are going to be talking once again about these new rules for credit card companies in terms of identifying sales at gun stores. You know, yesterday we talked with the National Shooting Sports Foundation's Mark Oliva about what this new rule means, what it does and does not do. But we are seeing more reaction here and a lot of concern over the potential for a backdoor gun registry. I mean, this is something that Mark Oliva spoke about yesterday. Not a comprehensive list of every gun owner out there, but if you buy a firearm and you use a credit card to do so, gun control advocates would like to know about that, right? And as we discussed with Mark yesterday, the current listing that was announced over the weekend, right? This new category code for purchases at gun stores still does not allow these credit card companies to, I think Mark described it as to look inside the cart, right? So they'll know and they'll identify, okay, this was a purchase made at a gun store, but they won't know, hey, Cam went out and bought, you know, this particular rifle and this much ammunition, which of course is what gun control activists ultimately want. Ultimately, of course, gun control activists don't want anybody to be able to use their credit card to buy firearms because they don't want us to be able to use cash either, or Bitcoin or anything else. They don't want us to be able to buy guns. And anything they can do to try to make that more difficult is a win in their books. This is being sort of proclaimed as a step towards public safety. We've got a quote from Shannon Wass. We'll share with you in a couple minutes. But at Newsweek, Thomas Massie, Republican congressman from Kentucky, and Dr. John Lott, head of the Crime Prevention Research Center, have an op-ed out talking about the devil in the details, frankly, of this proposal and why it will not do what supporters say it will, right? That, again, that this is supposed to somehow crack down on violent crime because it's going to allow law enforcement to identify potentially suspicious purchases ahead of time. I guess they're going to have to get reported by these credit card companies. It means that the credit card companies themselves are going to have to try to determine what is or is not a suspicious purchase. And as Dr. Lott and Representative Massey point out in Newsweek, gun buyers who use credit cards have already passed background checks to see if they can legally buy guns. So what suspicious activities could credit card companies possibly look for? Is buying 2 or 3 guns evidence of suspicious activity? The majority of mass public shootings since 1998 used only one firearm. Do you look for people who buy AR-15s? Happens to be America's most popular rifle. Put aside that even the Associated Press now recognizes that these aren't, quote, weapons of war and are no different from other hunting rifles. Only rarely do public mass shootings involve rifles or and no other type of firearm. Should we be suspicious if someone purchases a couple hundred rounds of ammunition? They wonder. People can easily use that many rounds at a shooting range in an afternoon. This is a legit concern, by the way, that you're going to have people who not only don't know about gun ownership, but are hostile to gun ownership, being the ones to determine whether or not a particular purchase is suspicious. Now, again, keep in mind, under the current standard that was just announced over the weekend, you're not going to be able to peer into the cart. So you're not going to be able to say, well, it's an AR-15 purchase. That's what's going to trigger it. It's the purchase of more than 2 guns at a time. That's what's going to trigger. That's what's going to be suspicious. Because these credit card companies still aren't going to have, they're not going to have that detailed knowledge, right? The code will say, all right, this was a purchase done at a gun store, but they still can't peer into the cart. So as Mark Oliver was talking about yesterday, if somebody goes out and spends several $1,000s getting ready for duck season, right? Because they got to get new waders, maybe they want a new shotgun, maybe they need to get some new ammunition. All that's going to show up, as far as the credit card companies are concerned, is that, you know, Joe Blow spent $3,500 at a gun shop. So really the only thing that they can use right now to flag something as suspicious is the total price tag. And then it becomes a question of, okay, well, what's that magic number, right? Is it $1,000? Because that's going to encompass many rifles and some handguns as well. $2,000, $5,000, $10,000. I mentioned yesterday when somebody buys a $40,000 boat at Bass Pro. Yeah, it's going to come up as a $40,000 purchase at a gun store. Is that going to be flagged as suspicious? Probably. Which is why I said when writing about our interview with Mark Oliver yesterday that this is likely to lead to way more red herrings than legitimate red flags. But even if you were to take the next step that these gun control groups will be demanding, and to open up the cart, so to speak, so that these credit card companies can look inside and say, Joe bought an AR-15 and a SIG P365. Well, that's suspicious. Even if you do that, what is to determine what a suspicious transaction is supposed to be? Dr. Lott, Representative Massey point out, most of these cowardly killers have used just one gun. There occasionally might be an instance of, I think there was the Pulse nightclub killer. Spent about $26,000 on credit cards over the a couple of weeks before he carried out that attack. Now, could this maybe have identified that individual as a somebody who's buying a lot of dangerous things? Maybe, but it still wouldn't be evidence of a crime. So it's still unclear to me what law enforcement can actually do with this information. As Representative Massey and Dr. Lott write, despite what people see on crime shows like Law and Order, gun registration doesn't help law enforcement solve crimes. Police in jurisdictions from Hawaii to New York, they've had registration for decades, can't point to any crimes that they've been able to solve because of the law. Even entire countries such as Canada haven't had success. If guns are left at a crime scene and are registered to the person who committed the crime, it's possible to trace the gun back to the criminal. But guns are virtually never left at crime scenes, and in the few times that they aren't registered to the person who committed the crime. So why, they wonder, do Democrats keep calling for a costly policy that does nothing to reduce crime? Why do they insist on knowing who owns which guns? It's a good question. Now, there are a couple of potential answers, right? They might want to know who owns those guns so they can go round them up at some point. That could be a bad idea on multiple levels, but maybe that's the case. But it could also be that this is less about knowing who owns the guns, given that the system that was announced over the weekend is not going to actually allow that. And again, this is more about denormalizing and delegitimizing the firearms industry and gun ownership in general. I think it is, listen, it shouldn't come as a shock that gun control groups are angry about the fact that over the past couple of years, we've had millions of new gun owners. That's completely antithetical to their agenda. They want fewer guns in the hands of fewer Americans. They made no bones about that. Meanwhile, we've had record-setting gun sales in 2020. 2021, sales down slightly from the year before, but still well above the historic norms. And again, millions upon millions of first-time gun buyers. And so I think that has led a sense of urgency to this 5-year-long effort to try to get credit card companies to act as a sort of a de facto gun control group. Because they know that things are trending in the wrong direction for the anti-gun ideology. They know that more Americans are embracing their right to keep and bear arms. They are well aware, obviously, of the Supreme Court's decision, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, which said, not only do you have the right to keep a gun in your home for self-defense, you have the right to carry a firearm in public in self-defense as well. And this is, I think, given, again, new urgency to these efforts to delegitimize and denormalize gun ownership. So, what do gun owners think about this? Well, in Indiana, one local station, I believe this was a WISH-TV, went and spoke to a local gun store owner, the head of Premier Arms, Bryce Curry, who said that roughly 80% of his store sales happen via credit cards. He says that number's actually gone up in recent months. He says we've seen more people making purchases on a credit card, even splitting it up on more than one credit card. And that's, again, no surprise. Because, well, thanks to Bidenflation, everything's gotten more expensive. People are living. People, let's put it this way. People who weren't living paycheck to paycheck are now living paycheck to paycheck. People who were living paycheck to paycheck are now hoping to make it to the next payday, right? And yet, if you need a firearm for self-defense, if you're worried about, I don't know, increased crime in your neighborhood, and you want to be able to protect yourself and your family, and again, you are on a fixed income or a limited income, you're struggling to pay the bills, you're trying to figure out, what to do every month, guess what? You need to make a major purchase, several $100s. You're probably going to put that on a credit card, right? Mom's Man Action. Shanna Watts talked to WISH TV as well. Said in a statement, quote, "These new merchant codes will help financial institutions track and crack down on suspicious and potentially illegal gun purchases. Now we need all other banks and credit card companies to follow their lead." How exactly is that going to happen? Again, I've not heard an explanation from a gun control activist like Shanna Watts about how these new codes are going to help identify potentially illegal sales, which, by the way, if we're going through sales at gun stores, then all those sales have gone through background checks. Straw purchases can happen at a gun store, but you're not going to be able to identify a straw purchase based on a credit card receipt, right? It's not going to happen. So I am just scratching my head trying to figure out how this is supposed to work from a gun control perspective in terms of fighting crime, in terms of preventing crime. I don't see it. I see this as a way to, again, chill the exercise of the right to keep and bear arms by not only pressuring credit card companies to adopt these new codes, but what happens next, right? Demanding that they, again, have access to peer inside the cart. And then ultimately to shut down the practice of buying firearms on credit entirely, as we've seen from folks like Representative Carolyn Maloney and other anti-gun Democrats who have raised questions about this practice. Apparently, guns are like the only legal product that you should not be able to buy on credit. Cash up front only. At the same time, these same Democrats are trying to move like the cash-based cannabis industry into the banking sector. They want to try to push the firearms industry and gun owners out. Curry, the CEO of Premier Arms, says that he has already been hearing from customers. Said about half of his sales involve items other than guns or ammunition, like sights, scopes, holsters, other accessories. And as he notes, he says if somebody comes in and spends $10,000 in every holster known to man, then you got to flag somebody who's buying $10,000 worth of firearms. And the answer is yes. Right now, yes. Even within the firearm category, Curry says, there are a lot of potential for error. His inventory includes antique firearms that in some cases predate the Civil War. Those tend to command high prices. Collectors often buy multiple firearms. And Curry said such collectors could unknowingly trigger some sort of action through such purchases. And again, for the gun control activists, this is fine and dandy. It doesn't matter if this leads law enforcement on all these wild goose chases, going after legal gun owners, knocking on their doors, right, without warrants. Hey, just checking, heard through the grapevine that you bought a gun last week. Just want to make sure that everything was on the up and up. Do you mind if we see the gun? No, I don't have a warrant, but can we see the gun? Do you mind if we see the gun? I mean, we've already seen some of that happen from the ATF, but we are likely to see a lot more of this. Again, not going to be stopping violent criminals, but will be harassing legal gun owners, which to the gun control lobby is not a bug, but a feature, right? So I don't think we've seen the end of this. It may be some time, at least a little bit of time, before these new codes are actually implemented. But in the meantime, the gun control lobby is going to continue to push for more in an attempt, yes, to establish some sort of half-assed backdoor gun registry. I call it half-assed because that's what it would be. This would not be a registry of every gun owner in America. This would be a privately held registry of everybody who used, let's say, a Visa card to go and purchase a firearm. And then Visa would have that list, right? MasterCard would have the list of everybody who used a MasterCard or American Express. But it would not be able to roll up every gun owner or even every new gun owner in the country because, frankly, a lot of Americans who are concerned about their privacy are going to say, you know what? I'll save up. I'll pay cash. I'll borrow some money from my brother-in-law. I'll go get an advance on my next paycheck. One thing is clear, though. The burden on these new laws, particularly if gun control advocates get their way, and eventually are able to convince credit card companies, hey, just don't process sales at gun stores. You're better off, if you just safer for you, because boy, it'd be a shame if you got sued for, processing the sale of this gun that was later used in a crime. I better just not sell. I better not allow your customers to purchase guns with their credit cards at all. If that happens, then again, the burden is going to fall on those Americans at the lower end of the economic spectrum. Those Americans who, again, don't have cash on hand to pay for a firearm, but still possess the need for self-defense, and most importantly, possess the right to keep and bear arms. So we will be paying close attention to this particular issue in the coming days and weeks, because as we heard from Mark Oliva, and as we've heard from gun control groups, this really is the first step, not the final goal of the gun control regime. All right, let's turn our attention to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our armed citizen story, or our recidivist report. We'll start there out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We talked about this story week before last. A pizzeria owner shot and killed during a robbery. He was an armed citizen. He did fire back at the robber. Unfortunately, he lost his life. The robber was arrested, and as it turns out, had a lengthy criminal history. It gets worse, apparently, because now we've learned that the man accused of shooting and killing the owner of the Giovanni's Pizzeria, Rosario Zito, was out of jail and on probation when the murder happened. He appeared in court yesterday for violating his probation. Yeah, he's facing murder charges, but he was there for a probation violation hearing. In January, Sylvan Alcachupas, pleaded guilty to robbing a convenience store at gunpoint in August of 2020. And he got probation. This is amazing. KRQE in Albuquerque says city leaders said that he should have been held behind bars. Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller says this particular issue has its own background and history, but part of it is somebody who probably should not have been on the streets at that time with a gun. Yeah, well, again, he wasn't legally allowed to possess the gun because he had been convicted of a felony, so he was a prohibited person. So it's not like Sylvan Alcachupas, could have been stopped by universal background checks, which are in place in New Mexico, or a red flag law, which is also in place in New Mexico. No, he's a violent criminal who was convicted of a violent crime, who got a slap on the wrist and was sent on his merry way, and strangely enough, apparently wasn't concerned about the consequences for committing violent crimes because of his own experience in the criminal justice system. It was not until yesterday that a judge ruled that Alcachupas be held behind bars for violating his probation. District Court Judge Cindy Mercer saying the court notes that Mr. Alcachupas' two separate allegations of violating his conditions of probation has also picked up serious charges while out on probation. So the court is going to hold him on a no-hold bond, which is great, but completely superfluous because he's already being held without bond for murder. Now, KRQE says, while the plea deal in the gas station robbery was struck with the Valencia County DA's office, the Bernalillo County DA's office previously said that his probation should have been revoked when he was picked up in August by state police. That's right. Yeah, he was picked up in a stolen car while he was on probation, driving a stolen car. Oh, there was heroin in the stolen car when he was picked up while he was on probation. And again, was released on bond. The Bernalillo County DA's office says the stolen car case that came to us should have triggered a probation revocation process because he was already a convicted felon in a different district. And it didn't. It didn't. Meanwhile, Democrats in Santa Fe are already prepping for another legislative session chock full of new gun control laws. Are they going to do anything to fix the broken criminal justice system that is allowing violent criminals like Mr. Alcachupas to be released on his own word, even while on probation, even when caught behind the wheel of a stolen car with illegal drugs inside? Are Democrats going to do anything to fix that problem? No. Instead, they're going to focus on the problem of you and me and law-abiding residents of New Mexico exercising their constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms in self-defense. Now, today's armed citizen story, Abilene, Texas, where a man held a burglar at gunpoint after catching him trying to steal his son's vehicle. Like the vast majority of defensive gun uses across the country, this one did not end in shots fired. The presence of the firearm was enough to stop the crime from escalating any further. Craig Campbell arrested at the scene of the burglary around 4 o'clock this morning. An arrest report states that a resident at a home on Waverly Avenue in Abilene heard his dogs barking, so he went outside, found Campbell inside his son's Mustang. He then drew his firearm, held Campbell at gunpoint until police showed up. When interviewed by officers, the report states that Campbell entered the car, admitted he was planning to try to steal it, and he had been drinking. Also said he might have been interested in buying it. I might have stolen it. I might have paid cash for it. Oh, yeah, by the way, I've had a few tonight. Well, I guess he got to sleep off the bender at the local jail. He is currently in the Taylor County Jail without bond, by the way, for what amounts to auto theft. Meanwhile, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, he got caught behind the wheel of a stolen car with heroin, and that's a get-out-of-jail-free offense. Today's good deed of the day from San Bernardino, California, where a couple of police officers went out on what they thought was a disturbance call, ended up having to rescue a mother and her children from a flash flood. Yeah, how quickly things can change. So this happened earlier this week. It was, I think it was maybe Monday or Sunday of this week. Officer Tommy Tran and Jonathan Mason showed up as backup for an incident that was, again, described as a disturbance. Gabriel Rodriguez from San Bernardino PD was the first on the scene there. And Rodriguez says, as I'm debriefing the other two officers, we noticed the mother and her two kids fall into the water, and they start washing away. The water was first ankle deep, and then it was knee deep, and then it was quickly moving enough to carry the mom and her two children, one age 6, one 14. Officer Mason says the water level was rising, so the next thing we knew, they were being taken away by the water. So the three officers basically formed a human chain, went into the water, were able to pull mom and both kids to safety. Officer Tommy Tran says they held on to me as I tried to walk the family back to the other side of the road. All officers now being called heroes. All three of them, by the way, less than a year on the job in San Bernardino. Tommy Tran says, never once in the academy did we train for a swift water rescue. But again, in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. Officers Tommy Tran, Jonathan Mason, Gabriel Rodriguez, we thank you for your very, very good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program. As always, I would encourage you to check out the website, bearingarms.com. Throughout the day, we've got even more of the latest Second Amendment news and information that you need to know about, including a look at the incredible amount of spending in Philadelphia on violence prevention programs with no clear metric of success, just throwing money away in many cases. We've got that story and more. So I'd encourage you, again, to check out bearingarms.com. If you like what you see, you can also become a VIP member at Bearing Arms. All you got to do, go to bearingarms.com/subscribe, use the promo code GUNRIGHTS, and you can get a significant savings on your VIP membership. As our way of saying thanks, we're going to give you exclusive content, news stories, analysis, stuff you won't find anywhere else, because your support does matter, and it really does make a difference. So thanks again. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company, but until then, be well. Be safe. Be free.